Good morning, everyone. In the previous video, we had done an introduction to An Ode to the West Wind by P.B. Shelley. We had done an introduction both to the poet and the poem, and in this video, we would be doing an explanation of the same. We would begin by reading the poem and then explaining. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou, from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes, O thou who chariotest to their dark wintry bed the winged seeds, where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow her clarion over the dreaming earth and frill, driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air, with living hues and odors plain and hill. Wild spirit, which art moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, O hear. In these opening lines of Shelley's poem, Ode to the West Wind, the poet describes the powers of the west wind and its activities on the earth. The west wind is described as destroyer and preserver, sweeping away the dry leaves and preserving the seeds for the regeneration of the earth in spring. The west wind appears to Shelley one of the invisible forces of nature. The poet calls the west wind as the vital essence of the autumn season. The west wind is invisible. The invisible west wind is chasing away dry leaves, just as a magician or exorcist puts the ghost to flight. Just as ghosts are blown away by the wand of an enchanter, the dried up dead leaves of trees are blown away in autumn by the west wind. The west wind is mighty like an enchanter. It is mysterious and invisible, just as the spiritual force of the enchanter is invisible. The dry leaves are yellow and black and pale and dimly red. Their color shows redness of decay and disease. The dead leaves, which are dimly red and pale, are blown off by the wind, just as crowds of people struck by some fatal epidemic disease are driven away from their town by the fear of the epidemic disease. In these lines, the poet describes the powers of the west wind as the preserver of seeds. The west wind scatters the winged seeds and drives them to their dark, cold beds under the earth. There, like dead bodies, the seeds lie in their graves, unable to move or rise till the spring season comes. The poet calls spring the sister of autumn and of the west wind. But while autumn is dull and gloomy, spring is marked by light breezes and blue skies. So the spring comes with its light breezes and blue skies. She blows her trumpet in order to awaken the sleeping earth. With the coming of spring, the nature wakes to a new life. Hence, the poet imagines that the spring blows a trumpet in order to arouse the earth, just as a trumpet is blown to call soldiers to duty. On hearing the calls of the trumpet, the seeds come out of their graves. The poet compares the spring to a shepherd, just as a shepherd takes his flock of sheep to the fields in order to graze them. Similarly, the spring drives the seeds out of the buds in which they are shut into the open air. With the coming of spring, buds and flowers begin to bloom and feed in the air, just as sheep roam about and feed in the field. In a word, the spring will fill the valleys and hills with buds and flowers, which have beautiful colors and sweet smells. The poet again addresses the west wind. He calls it an untamed spirit because it is making itself felt all over the land. He addresses it as destroyer and preserver. It is a destroyer because by driving the rotten leaves before it, the wind breaks them up and shatters them into small pieces which are lost. It is a preserver because by scattering and driving the seeds to their underground beds, the wind preserves the seeds which later sprout into plants. To this west wind, which is a destroyer and preserver, the poet appeals that his words may be heard. The lines are an invocation to the west wind. Let's move on to the next few lines of the poem. Thou on whose stream, mid the steep sky's commotion, leaves, loose clouds like earth's decaying leaves are shed, shook from the tangled boughs of heaven and ocean, angels of rain and lightning, there are spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge, like the bright hair uplifted from the head of some fierce Maenad, even from the dim verge of the horizon to the zenith's height, the locks of the approaching storm. Thou dirge of the dying year, to which this closing night will be the dome of a vast sepulchre, vaulted with all thy congregated might of vapors, from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hail will burst, O hear. In these lines, the poet has described the powers of the west wind over land. It drives the dead leaves before it and conveys the seeds to their dark beds under the earth. They sprout when the spring season comes. In this stanza, the poet tells us how the west wind blows from the sky to the earth. He expresses his idea by presenting a picture which is somewhat vague and hazy. He compares the clouds which float on the surface of the wind to the leaves which fall on the earth. We can understand these lines by imagining that there is a vast tree whose roots are in the ocean and whose branches are high up in the sky. From the branches of the tree fall clouds in the same way as rotten leaves fall from an ordinary tree. These clouds from that tree fall on the surface of the west wind, just as rotten leaves from a tree fall on the earth below. Further, these clouds fall on the surface of the west wind when there is unrest or tumult in the high sky, that is, when the sky shows stormy conditions. These clouds are messengers of rain and lightning. The poet then presents the picture of a storm that is about to blow. He says that the black hair of the storm is spread on the blue waves of the surface of the west wind. The hair of the storm covers the surface of the west wind all the way from the horizon to the highest point in the sky. The hair of the storm spread in this way is just like the disordered hair of the terrible female worshipper, Maenad, that is, of the wine goddess Dionysus, who moved about in great intoxication with their long locks flowing in the air. What the poem means is that as his eyes travel from the horizon to the highest point in the sky above, the appearance of the sky indicates that a storm is blowing. The poet presents a third picture. He imagines the whistling sound of the west wind to be the dirge, that is, of the dying year. Dirge is the funeral song of the dying year. The year is dying. The west wind is the funeral song over the death of the year. A huge tomb will also be erected over the dead year. The darkness of the night, which is spreading over the earth, will serve as the dome of that tomb. The dense mass of the clouds will form the ceiling of the vast grave. From the dense clouds in the sky forming this ceiling, there will fall rain, lightning, and hails upon the earth. In the end, the poet appeals to the west wind to hear his prayers. We will continue the video